read the paper today.
Yeah.
Not something I planned on doing.
Well, you know, we need all the help we can get, that's for sure.
Yes.
Commissioners, we are live now. Mary, you're able to confirm that?
Are we streaming now?
Yes.
Okay.
And President Lindner, the only thing I'll say is that because of, I think, your distance, you seem a little quieter this time than last time. Just an FYI. We can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
All right. Well, I'll use my work voice, which is usually yelling. So that'll be appropriate. So Linda, I know you've got a hard stop at 5 o'clock, and I will do everything in my power to keep this thing rolling so you can get all of your fill here and then move on to your next meeting.
And thank you.
With that, I would like to call the meeting to order, the special agenda meeting. And I believe we'll start with a roll call to make sure that everybody's here.
Yes. President Lindner?
Yes, here.
Vice President Getz?
Here.
Commissioner Castellini?
Here.
Commissioner Flynn?
Here.
Commissioner Thomas?
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we're all here. So I don't know, I didn't check whether there was any public comments related to this meeting. Did anybody show up for that?
There were no public comments submitted for this meeting.
Right. So we will move on to the second item of business here, which is the infrastructure study update, which is going to be delivered by our Master Steve Shookman, Division Manager. So I don't know, Kara, do you want to set anything up for this or just shift it over to Steve?
Just a little bit. Yeah, thank you. The first agenda item is going to be an update on the infrastructure study. As you are aware, we're not quite finished with it yet, but this document, even in its current status, has been such a contribution to the capital budget that we've prepared. So as you stated, Mr. Schuckman will lead us through this. We also have Cindy France, who's on Steve's team, as you're aware, and then Pat has joined us, who is with Branstetter Carroll. So Steve, tell us about where we are and where we're going.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's a massive study, as you've seen. As Kara said, Pat Hoagland's on the call to answer any questions. He led the team of consultants. The lead consultant was Branstetter Carroll, and they did a massive study starting last winter of all our infrastructure, all the roads and walks and buildings and playgrounds and retaining walls, etc. So the complete study, the two pieces not yet finished, are a look at Crone Conservatory and programming needs at Crone, particularly for a future expansion of Crone. And that includes case studies they did of 2 regional conservatories. And then the final plan will also include an overview of the 2007 master plan updated with today's costs. So the infrastructure study, as Kara said, are, as you'll see, the fiscal year 22 and 23 budgets are both based in large part on the findings of the infrastructure study. They looked at overall a need of over $74 million of need. And that breaks down to almost $61 million of base infrastructure costs. And that then breaks down into the categories of those facilities that were only in fair condition, and that's $22 million of costs. And then the ones that we took for the next 2 budget years, in particular, those facilities that are in poor conditions, and that's $11 million in cost. And when you add in contingencies and design and engineering, that comes to $13.9 million for facilities in poor condition and just over $27 million for facilities in fair condition. Our findings are that those facilities, those buildings and sites in poor condition really should be addressed within the next 1 to 2 years. Those in fair condition, we're looking at a window of 2 to 4 years. The bulk of our infrastructure is in good and excellent condition. So with regular maintenance being applied, we don't see any major work being needed probably for at least 10 years. One of the unknowns here, and we sort of knew it going in, is underground utilities. Our storm lines, our sewer lines, our water lines. We can't really anticipate what issues we'll have with them since we can't see them. Many, if not most, are 75 to 100 years old. So this study includes a percentage of the replacement costs that we'd hope to carry in our budget each year, so that when we encounter a collapsed line, something we need to repair or replace, we'd have the funds to do it. There's a lot of information here. We're not asking you to approve the study. We just wanted to share it with you. I think it was 2 months ago, we sent you links to a lot of the raw information. So a lot of it has now been refined into charts. You'll see the individual park by park needs. You'll see the individual categories of needs, and in particular, focusing on those facilities, those sites that are in the worst condition, that is the fair and the poor condition. There's a lot of material here, so we're happy to go over any of it with you, answer any questions, and Pat and Cindy are here to help me do that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
Is there a way of resorting? It looks like this is done on a spreadsheet. Is there a way of resorting so that all of the poor, rather than it being sorted alphabetically by facility, it's sorted by condition so that the poor items show up at the top and then the fair items, so that we know what, it's easy to see what needs to be worked on right away?
Well, let me just mention that in one of the attachments to the next board report on the capital budget, one of those attachments does that by parks, just into fair and poor categories.
Okay, and yeah, I was spending all my time on the report rather than going to the capital budget, so maybe this is also dealt with there, but it looked like a lot of the things, as you were indicating, relative to the utilities, were the things that were in poor condition were a lot of the stormwater facilities. And I know that we have a separate fund that we get from the city for diverting stormwater out of the stormwater system. And that led to a bigger question of, rather than it, just because it's in poor condition, it comes out of our general capital budget. If it's in poor condition or fair condition, or even in good condition and just needs some maintenance, but there's a separate source of funding, as there is with Smale and some of the other parks, Bicentennial Commons. Should we be looking at it in that way, breaking out the parts that can be paid for with money outside of our general capital budget?
That's a good point, and I think that maybe Craig could speak to it. We do get funding from the Stormwater Fund, Fund 107. It's my understanding, however, that those funds are already used to pay staff to keep grates and the trash racks and storm sewers clear, so there doesn't appear to be any extra money to put into capital. Because certainly we look to other sources. And again, the next report in the capital budget mentions that where we can look at commissioner funds, where we could look at grants and restricted revenue, certainly we look to that to supplement the capital budget we get from the city.
Steve, if I could respond to his first part of that question. The Excel table that is used does have a separate sortable tab You can sort by park, by type of, the type of improvements, and also by the condition and then the cost. So any way you want to sort those, you can.
Yeah, if we could, that was my point too. Kevin and I must be the geeks in this crowd, but I would like to get the Excel documents as
Okay.
well, so that we can do some slicing and dicing, because I agree. There's some things I'd like to put in different order, and I wouldn't want you guys spinning your wheels for every request for a different format.
And that brings up another issue, that at some point we need to figure out how to present this material, since it's hundreds and hundreds of pages. You just saw a sample of some of the pictures included, but I know Pat's team has shot hundreds of pictures. So one of our tasks is to create this document. So it's a good wealth of material, but it's also relatively user-friendly to be able to find the information that you need.
Yeah, if there's some way to do some sort of share file so that we can just put the files out there and we can access them, rather than, it's your guys' call as far as, do we need to have absolutely everything in one document for a report? I just think if there could be a way to put it in a share file, even if there's separate tabs or whatever, that we can access a lot of the material.
Yeah, we can do that. At some point, we do want to have a finished document for the public and for city council, obviously.
Steve, I've got a question as it relates to the comment you made about, I believe it was the good and, I don't know whether it was good and excellent
Yes.
condition. The maintenance, if we keep the maintenance up, we should be good for 10 plus years before we have to circle back. Have we been doing that historically, and can we, or do we have that money in the budget to continue to keep those in well-maintained, as well as then attack some of the poor and then ultimately fair projects?
I think we do. And one of the findings actually I was pleased with that the consultant team found is that though we know we have a lot of work to do, that generally the buildings that we use every day, the sites that people use and see in parks every day, are in relatively good condition. So I think that if we have enough funding to basically keep our heads above water to do all those things. At some point, things will age out, and we know that that's just the nature of things. But in terms of keeping a basic level of service and maintenance, I think that we're in pretty good condition, as long as we get a good dose of capital funding each year. And that's a whole nother issue. The difference between our targets and what council appropriates and the needs we see we have.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
Linda, I'll go with you.
Well, thank you. A question for clarification. As I was reading, I was not able to always distinguish between what is classified as improvement versus maintenance, because a lot of the pictures didn't look like improvements to me. They look more like these are things we need to fix. So I was a little bit confused by that. So if there's a distinction that can be made so that when we look at the data, we are thinking about things that are improvements, which means like additions or changes to me, versus taking care of something that's broken.
I think we've been probably using the word improvements somewhat generically. For the most part, what we're talking about are repairs and replacements.
Yes.
Replacement
Okay.
in kind. And that's what the infrastructure fund is about.
Great. The other one is when I was thinking about a fund like the one for Fleshman's Gardens, where we have a set amount of money each year. And if the expenditures for that particular park don't exceed the amount of money we have, then we can allocate that to a different park. But at the same time, when I go through the document, there are improvements that are needed there. So I'm just wondering about how those choices and decisions are being made.
Yeah, that I think actually that came up at the last board meeting. So Fleischman is a good example that the funding is, and again, Craig could speak to the balance, but the funding generally is adequate, not just for day-to-day maintenance, but if we need to make repairs or replacements, that's exactly what the Fleischman Fund is for. And as you said, we would be making those expenditures at Fleischman before we spent it in any other park, even though we're entitled to. And I believe Geyer is the same way.
Sure. So then, so the question I have is about spending, and maybe this is a going forward kind of approach. So we should not be spending the overage somewhere else when we've still got improvements that need to be made in a specific park, right?
I think it's up to the discretion of the commissioners, depending on what the improvement is, where we prioritize the improvement. I think you're on a really good train of thought about using dollars where dollars are needed to be used. But I do think that the utilization of those funds is within your discretion.
Okay.
We'll do our work to make solid recommendations to you. But if there is ever a need that you identify as greater than whatever the improvement needs to be made at that site, I think you have the discretion to make that. Oh, in general, though, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're kind of getting at in general, which is dollars associated with one park should be used for that park if needed.
Yeah, especially if we're identifying things that are poor or fair or whatever. So yeah, I understand it's going to be, we'll be making decisions, but if we get to the point that says we really want to address those things that are in poor condition, if they exist in a particular park where we've got designated funds for that park, those things ought to be addressed.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Jim.
The only,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Linda.
one last one.
You
When I'm reading through and I'm looking at the number that says $11 million for, I think it's the poor ones. But then when you add in the contingencies and the others, it's 13. So what I want to do is keep 13 in my mind, if that is the real number, so we won't be kidding ourselves that it's $2 million less than it really is.
Yeah, that's the greatest struggle when we talk here, is that there really are two, to get to that sum total, there really are two buckets. It's the actual cost of the repair, and then the cost for the contingencies and the planning and design work. I think you are absolutely right with acknowledging that it's not this number, it's this number. And we again have done our best to capture that, but when it comes to our discussions with each other,
Sure.
Yeah, it's a different number than the base price for the repair itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I did want to mention on that we didn't want to change the numbers from the columns of what the study said were needed for poor and fair, but that you're right, it's an important footnote. You have 10% essentially added to those costs for contingencies, and we've seen that in project after project, and then design and engineering. And that is a 12% cost, so we acknowledge that in some cases it's going to be far less than that. In some cases, more technical projects, the design and engineering and technical work might be more.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Kevin.
Another question for Steve and or the experts here. When we're talking about parking repairs, are we also talking about parking striping, which is lacking in a lot of our parks? And normally you would think of that as maintenance, but since it doesn't exist, I didn't know whether it was more of a capital item.
Actually, we are looking at and have embarked on or about to embark on an extensive striping campaign to stripe where we're looking at that now internally, Kevin, on where we need to stripe just for more efficient parking, and certainly lots of places we need to stripe for ADA purposes for the parking and for the loading zones. In fact, we're just about to do some of that in Mount Airy Forest.
Kevin, both Jenny and I have had, our deputy director and I have had lots of conversations about this becoming a responsibility under the operations division, as well as creating a plan of execution. You know, how often are we going to stripe? Where are we going to stripe? Are there other places such as the ADA spaces which should be striped annually, and where are we going to fund that from? So it's a fair question, and it certainly is on our radar.
Jim, you had a question earlier.
Yeah, let me address a few things. Number one, I am thrilled with the detailed data and what the glimpse of the pictures and everything that we have. I think this is going to be an extremely, extremely good tool for us to use from a detailed priority standpoint and really knowing where to address some things. But when I step back and look at this, the detail might be new, but the bottom line story is the same story that we've known for quite a while. And I know before I even came on the park board, park leadership was talking about over $60 million of maintenance needs in the parks that we didn't have money for. And that story's still the same, except that number has grown from over 60 million to over now $70 million of work that's needed. My concern is that when I hear the initial responses now for what we're going to do about it, it seems to be we're just approaching this as business as usual. And let me explain that. It's you know, when I hear stories about or the update that we got from you, Kara, back at the beginning of November, you recognize that, oh, this isn't going to be done till the end of the year, so it's not going to be able to impact 2022, and that it's going to be fiscal year 24 or 25, according to your email to us, before we can fully address the study itself. And then even in the memo from Steve today, Steve says that future considerations should include development of a long-term strategy to address infrastructure needs. Well, my concern is the current needs and the immediate needs as opposed to long-term needs. And when I think about the issues that we have, and like with Linda, the issues that she brought up, we've created some of this problem. For example, when you look at the report, it talks about, I won't use Fleischmann since you used that, but Bettmann's another one that's got poor and fair items on our list. And it totals almost $130,000 of poor and fair things that need to be done to Bettmann. Well, in our commissioner's fund, we've got a specific account for Bettmann. And at the end of the year, we had almost $200,000 in that account. And then even back in 2018, park staff said to us, oh, we've got way too much money in the Bettmann account. Let's send $325,000 of that money that's available to do maintenance back to the corpus. And we sent it back to the fund. And then when I look at what we've looked at for the past 4 years of capital that I've been involved with the park board budget, we seem to hide behind, well, as Steve said earlier, we ask for more money, but we never get it. Well, when I look at the last detailed capital report that you guys provided to us, if you look back to 2017 on that report, it shows of the $23 million plus that's been approved and sitting in capital accounts at the city, we've only spent just over $6.7 million of that. So that money is still sitting there. And on top of that, we've got well over $6 million sitting in our commissioner's fund, sitting there waiting to be expended. So it's not a money problem. And then when I look at the documents that you've given for us to look at today, we're actually even more adding more infrastructure and more bureaucracy to the planning division, where we're talking about putting in a park improvement community request program that's going to involve an administrative review and a scoping review, an investigative review, and a technical review by the same Division of Planning. And the staff is also in the reports you've given us today. The staff's already engaged in a data-driven equity study to look at gaps in our green spaces that's also being led by our planning division. So I guess from my perspective, I'd like to know, since we haven't heard any recommendations or any proposals for changes, how do we plan to get any of this work done if we're assuming we're going to have the same amount of staff and the same structure that we've had for the past 5 years?
I'm happy to respond to all of Commissioner Getz's questions, concerns. I did write them all down. Commissioner Getz, if I get to the end of my explanations and I haven't addressed something, please let me know. So one of the requests, or one of the first things that you referenced was the timeliness of when we could really put this facility study into full force. When could we really get behind it and say, these are our needs? I'm very proud to say that we have incorporated a lot of it into this plan. It's not delayed until 2025. Given the timeline, we will not have the final report until it's time to get to that budget. But what we have done is in order to prioritize, what the method that staff utilized was what's in poor and fair condition. That's how we engaged with the current status of the facility studies to identify what is the most important and what are the things to get to. So that is how we are currently actively engaging in a plan with a plan which is not even yet complete, was to incorporate it into this budget by looking at the poor and fair conditions, with the assumption, like they said, that good or excellent wouldn't need attention for 10 years. You are 1000% correct that there are dollars in our funds, both in the capital fund as well as the commissioner's funds, that should be spent. I've had ongoing conversations with each of you about how that is our focus. Craig and I have been very actively, since the day I started, having conversations about the importance. And then I've also spoken with each of you about the prioritization of the expenditure of the capital dollars over the commissioner's funds, with the presumption that the greatest impediment to greater funding is the fact that we haven't kept up with our spending in the capital account. So we agree with you. We are on the same page that we need to spend that. I think we have put forward a fairly aggressive amount of expenditures for this, which gets to another one of your points is, are we doing the same thing? Are we banging our head against the wall? And the appropriation of what has consistently been $2 million when we have requested more is the same scenario that we're in right now. The target from the city has been identified at approximately $2 million, and we are presenting roughly a $5 million budget to you. What I would like to do is, this is the first opportunity that I've had to work with you through this biannual budget season. I would like to employ as many resources as we possibly can to advocate for the expenditure of the funds. We have a different story to tell, or at least we have a data-driven story to tell now, is that this isn't just once, this is associated. Every dollar that we're asking for is directly associated with a documented, data-driven expense. I don't know what that looks like. In March, we have an opportunity, Craig and I present and defend the budget. I think that is a specific opportunity with the Budget and Finance Committee to show up in force. This document will be presented. It's an opportunity to show up with force, not just with the commissioners, but with other supporters and community leaders who would like to see an investment in the parks. And we start telling a different story. This is where I don't know if it's a different story, but it's definitely a data supported story by a third party. I'm not sure if that will be successful. My hope is that we put forward an incredible argument, an incredible supported argument for a greater amount of investment with the acknowledgement that a greater amount of investment is going to be needed in order to meet the long-term needs of the park. So, you know, what the outcome could potentially be is that, yes, all of this ends up in another $2 million budget, which we've demonstrated we would then come back and have discussions about what to expend that on and plan again. I think that there is a different story to tell with all of the data. And so my hope is that we would be successful in this process to get a greater amount associated for 22 and for 23.
Kara, I'm going to have to interrupt you.
Sure.
What you are not addressing is the money that is already in the city account that we're supposed to be spending on capital improvements.
Yeah.
Or can it be spent on maintenance? Does it have to be new things? That's what my confusion is.
I'm happy to address that, Susie. So that was the next point that Commissioner Getz made. A month or two ago, when we presented to you the outcome of the conversation correspondence that we had with the city budget office about the sunset plans, I left that conversation incredibly motivated, and I shared that with you. What we did was identify which dollars need to be spent, created plans in order to spend those dollars, and knowing that next year that we're going to have more things that fall into those sunsetted categories of 80% after 3 years to be completed by 4 years. Without question, there are items that are currently on our books that are starting to fall outside of those sunset plans. Where I feel confident in is that we have a plan. Now, it will take us 2 years, 3 years in order to catch up on that plan, but there is a steady plan in place to address those projects. And that's kind of the same with the commissioners' funds. I have been very vocal with each of you about the prioritization of the capital funds over the commissioners' funds, but we haven't lost sight of those resources that are available. They are built into this budget. We have started that process of identifying what funds are available and can be associated with different things, whether or not that's alignment with a capital project or that's alignment with a maintenance. I anticipate and plan that will be a much more aggressive conversation as we move forward, specifically with the operations team as well, to try and continue to identify things that maybe we have historically funded out of capital that are truly more appropriate to be spent. So it's a vast amount of resources. Everything that you're saying is completely accurate. But I feel confident that we do have that plan in place to get caught up. It doesn't negate the fact that we need to be a little bit more aggressive this year in order to start this plan. But I do feel confident that everything that is still in our coffers either has a plan associated with it, or we are aggressively talking about what resources those are. So Susie, I hope I've addressed your specific comment on that.
Sort of.
Yeah.
I fully feel that if we don't empty those coffers, they are going to think in council, we don't need all this money, because look what's still in the coffers. You see what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. I think there's two stories to tell. I think the one story is that the dollars that are in the coffers have a plan.
But you better have that spelled out to council and to the mayor so that they understand that they are earmarked.
Will do.
So
and that is what
coffers are in essence empty.
Absolutely. And that is reflective in the sunset process that we went through that was a part of your board packet a couple of months ago. But absolutely, that is the part of the story. Because we want them to entrust us to, you know, it's a whole nother thing to argue for a need, but we need them to trust that we are appropriately expending funds.
If I may just jump in a second, you know, what I heard Jim's question more or less was, we've got more work to do. The workload is backing up. We have a more challenging work process now because of the MOU. So how are we going to get more work done with the same amount of staff? I think, to me, we've got a discharge problem. We can't get enough work accomplished in the time frame available. So what is it on the discharge side of the equation that will happen to allow us to actually get more work done in the same time frame? Because the work will stack up. The variable is going to be how long it takes to get it done. And unless you beef up your staff or do something different from a process point of view, I don't see what really is going to change from the previous years as it relates to work output.
I am more than happy to address that. That was the closing points that I had.
Okay.
Commissioner Getz. So I'll address two things. One is Commissioner Getz, you've heard it, more bureaucracy, more process of things. And then the second item is the staffing. So the process that we've put in place, or the process that we've developed for reviewing what are community-driven requests, is not intended to be a cumbersome process. It is intended to be an equitable process where any idea that is generated outside of the park board goes through an equitable process. These different layers. The first layer is simple administrative, could be performed and will be performed by somebody on staff. It is just, what is the project that you're requesting? Is it already funded? Is it already in the works? It asks those types of questions just as a baseline of checking, and that will be done administratively. A second round will get into the value that project would bring into our organization. Is this something that aligns with, our plans in general? Is this something that is supported by the community? What are these other factors in addition to just it being feasible that will contribute? And that's a very baseline. All of that will be handled with documentation that they submit. And then the third round is that when something does get to that level of this is a great community supported idea, that is only when our planning and design team steps in and starts engaging in a conversation. Right now, what is occurring, and this is intended to lessen the workload, because what's occurring right now is that every single phone call that we get, and I get phone calls every day with a new idea, is somehow going through a nondescript vetting process, and even our planning and design resources might be contributed on the front end if something hasn't been vetted at large or compared to our larger processes. So this community-driven request process, I do not see as an extra level of bureaucracy. I do not see it as, I see this as a way for us to equitably engage with community-driven ideas, and also to minimize the appropriate time for planning and design to spend on a project. They will only step in if it rises to a level of worthiness of their time. Part of their time is vetting these new ideas. That's a responsibility that they have in their division. So something has to vet through enough in order to capture some of their time rather than everything capturing their time at the beginning. The second comment to that is in regards to the staffing. A lot of changes have occurred and will occur, which will strengthen the capacity of the planning and design division. The first, what I think is absolutely critical change that has occurred, is that planning and design used to be planning, design, and facilities. It is now planning and design. Facilities, which includes all of the daily emergencies and just the general upkeep, no longer will report directly to our planning and design team. That will go through our deputy director and through our division of operations. That was consuming a great amount of time of our planning and design team because that was a part of their daily responsibilities. That change has already occurred. That was been a part of our transition. The day that Ms. Mobley was assigned as the deputy director, that facilities team came under her responsibility. So facilities is removed. Secondly, by adding 2 professional positions to the team, we will have more individuals capable of serving in project manager roles as well as technical roles, effectively doubling the size of the professional team that currently exists. There are only a couple of vacancies. They are senior level professional positions that will greatly contribute to the capacity of our planning and design team. So both of those things combined, I believe, will give us a greater ability to address all of these pieces that we're trying to put into place.
So can you, I thought one of the positions was a clerical role. What are the 2 senior level positions you're talking about for planning?
So we currently have those assigned as a senior engineer and a senior landscape architect.
And you're actively looking to hire those people?
I would like those, because I would like the department filled by the start of fiscal year 22. That is a goal that we are working towards.
So I guess then I appreciate all your comments. What I'm hearing you say then is that if we do an excellent job of laying out our case to City Council and we get more than double what we've gotten in the past, that rather than since 2017 still having over, where are my notes, 13 million or whatever it is, you're saying that we'll be able to get caught up and actually handle double the annual capital requirement with the same staff, adding those 2 professionals? That's where you're coming from.
So every available dollar that is currently within our resources, within our capital budget, has been identified, projects associated with it, costs associated with it, and a plan to expend that. The addition of the influx of funds goes into the sunset process. So according to the policies that have been set by the Office of Budget and Management, while these projects may be initiated, we are provided with a timeline in order to expend those funds. But Office of Budget and Finances understands that the execution of a project, does not occur immediately, nor does it, the likelihood of it being performed in the fiscal year may be lessened. So I feel, yes, the answer to your question is yes. I feel comfortable that with the increased capacity, with the planning that we've done to address some of those remaining funds associated with the sunsetting. Yes, I feel confident that we are on a path to tackle. I don't think it's a path that can be fully tackled in 1 year. I would be hesitant on 2 years. Kind of since the day that I've started with you, I've said to each of you, I would like this to be brought under full control within a 3-year process of expenditures. And that is still my.
Can I challenge you then? If we added another senior person, can we get it done in less than 3 years? I think what we're trying to say to you, Kara, is that I appreciate the sunset rules and convincing City Council not to take away the money that we haven't spent. What I think I can speak for my colleagues that I'm looking at in the Hollywood Squares here, we want that money spent. I'm glad that we've got a plan. I'm glad that we're saying that we now are approaching a budget with putting a project to the dollars. But I think what we're trying to say to you is that we're not satisfied with the amount of work getting done. And we would like to get this work into actually spent dollars in the parks. So I would challenge you that if you're saying that with our current staff and our current structure, that a 3-year timetable is what should be expected. I would challenge you to figure out, or I would respectfully request you tell us what it would take to get it done sooner.
I respectfully, yeah, that is what I have designed and worked with the team to develop is a process within our current means. You're absolutely correct. I am comfortable and confident with the plan that we've set forth. Again, the little asterisk is with the current resources. So I will take that challenge and that consideration back to staff and have a conversation about, what if scenarios allow for a greater capacity to do that. I think as we've approached many other things, I'd like to see where we get. There's a lot of changes that will be in place in the next 6 months, including the full staff for the planning and design team. See how that fiscal year goes. But I hear you, and I know that the day that you appointed me, that was a shared vision as well, is to get these dollars spent, because it is a resource that belongs in the parks, not in an account of money. So we are being very forward and aggressive and progressive about how to engage with that. And I do share your vision, and I do hear your request and your what I take on my shoulders as a directive from the commissioners to realize within as short a time frame as possible.
Well, and I want to make sure that my colleagues feel the same way. I'm also somebody that believes in what is measured is accomplished. So I would like to ask Craig if he could go back and detail for us for perhaps the past 5 years, how much capital money was actually spent. And I'm saying how much capital money was actually spent, dollars out the door, each of the past 5 years. And if you want to break it down between out of the city coffers or out of the commissioner's fund, whatever it is. But if we don't start measuring it, I can see here for the past 4 years, nothing's changed. And in looking at the proposal plans that you've got for us today, nothing changes. So that's my challenge, and I don't know if my colleagues fully support that, but that's where I'm coming from.
If I could, I guess a couple of questions I have. One, I appreciate the process, call it improvement on community requested projects. So that seems like, that's an advancement. A question I have on that, though, is if we have a backlog of God knows how many projects, and planning and design is working on that backlog, and community projects then start coming in from, outside, where do they line up in the queue? Are they in the front of the queue? Are they in the back of the queue? Who decides when those projects get done? So, and then the other kind of to follow up on Jim's point of view or question is the way I understand it is we have shed from planning and design, call it the maintenance and operational aspects of it. So repairs, maintenance, et cetera, is off of their plate. I don't have a sense of how much time or effort that is, but that's freed them up. So that's added capacity that our team has now to focus on pure capital projects, which is what I think we're all, here to talk about. Then you've got the staffing additions on top of that, which is going to add additional capacity for us to perform those capital projects. And if we could take what Jim's suggestion is looking at historically back 4 or 5 years, what have we done from a capital point of view that, may then give us some sense of, with the shedding of the, call it operational facilities work, the addition of additional staff, what what do you all feel that translates into additional capacity? So for lack, I'm just making numbers up, but if planning and design has performed $8 million worth of projects every year for the past 4 years, they shed some of their work, add resources. Does that mean we can do $16 million worth of projects, or what? To me, that's what I think we need to be getting a sense of, is what right sizing our organization to accommodate the workload, the backlog of workload, the additional workload that keeps coming on, and getting it done in a time frame that doesn't put us in the crosshairs of council when they say, well, shoot, you've already got this money, we're not going to give you any more because you haven't spent it.
Yep.
So I think to me, those are some kind of important metrics to establish, just to make sure, because what I'd like to avoid is a year from now going, I guess we kind of missed it. I think we can probably get a better, or do a better job of projecting. And I know we're not going to hit everything perfectly, but I don't want to wait a long time to see whether we're on track or whether we're way off track. And I get a little concerned when it's going to take roughly 7 months then to hire 2 people. I don't deal in the city, and I know there's weird things that you guys have to do there, but 6 months or 7 months to hire 2 people, I gotta say to Jim, that seems like business as usual. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of Lord Beaverton. So I will reach back to my World War II history days, but Lord Beaverton was appointed by Winston Churchill to take the aircraft industry and revolutionize it, because the Germans were shooting them down quicker than they could build them. He turned that industry around in like a month, where he was doubling the capacity of construction of aircraft, and effectively saved Great Britain from getting overrun by the Nazis. So, maybe we could, channel a little bit of Lord Beaverton somewhere in this to get us, moving forward. So that's my comment.
Sure. I appreciate all of those. I'm happy to respond to a couple of them. I'll respond to your last comment first, which is about the aggressiveness of filling the positions. And I apologize if my comment about by the start of the fiscal year made it seem like it was far down my list on something to do. It is certainly a pressing topic that we are actively engaged in. I would also agree, I would not like to see it take 7 months. But right now we are just still in that process system-wide of hirings and promotions and transfers and all of that. So it is, again, I apologize if I made it seem like, oh, it's something we'll get to eventually. It is certainly.
No, don't get me wrong. It was in a sense of lack of, sense of urgency on your part. And trust me, I applaud everything you're doing. It's just looking at what we can do, because, it takes a long time to get things done in the city, and frankly, I think part of talking about keeping score and keeping track, I think part of what we need to be doing is figuring out who's holding up the ball. Is it legal holding up the ball? Procurement, we got 2 weeks. They got 2 weeks to decide, and then we're allowed to go out and do our thing. Everything else has got to go through the city process. But I don't want Steve to get the blame for something that is taking 3 months longer than it should, because it's sitting in legal's office for 2.5 months. Let's start keeping some pressure and at least have a scorecard of where it's at in the process.
Yeah.
Critical path on all of these capital projects, in other words.
Yes, exactly.
The other thing, excuse
Go
me.
ahead.
May I speak? All right,
Please, go
the
ahead.
other thing to remember, I think, is that don't forget, all of the salaries get paid by the city, and then out of our city budget, we pay it back. So you better subtract that whole great million, blah, 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 out of the 2 million they give you, and it leaves us about 500,000 to spend. You see what I mean? I think we have to keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't hire them, don't misunderstand me, but I want you to understand just how small what we get from the city turns out to be for the work we can get done with it in maintenance.
Yeah, that's certainly, Commissioner Castellini, that's certainly a frustration of ours as well. The budget that you've been presented does presume a fully staffed division. Just to
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Linda.
what I'm trying to wrap my mind around is focus and priorities. And while I really like the description of the process that you've laid out, Kara, as it relates to community input and request for, I don't know, improvements or whatever, I think that is really good. And I think it represents a way of getting things off the plate that you guys have been spending a lot of time on as they come up. So you got a process in place, you got a timing in place for that. I think that is helpful. The other piece for me that I'm trying to wrap my mind around are two things. The priority around addressing the poor items on this list, because I think those are priorities. And there's a cost attached to that. And there's timing attached to that. And also the money that we have at the city where there's sunset laws attached to. Have we matched those two things up so that if we address the poors, we're spending down that money? And if we look at that and those are aligned, or where they're not, we make appropriate adjustments. And at the same time, we say, okay, so what does that mean in terms of when that can be accomplished? The poors, we're saying 1 to 2 years. That's the timeline. So as we look at that, is that reasonable to expect that we will achieve that goal? And if not, then what is required to do that? And I think that's where the additional hiring comes in. That's where adjusting what is on that list or off that list comes in. But I think, at least for me, I would benefit from that kind of focus to say, here are the projects, here's the spending, here's the source of funding for that, here's the requirement for that in terms of staffing, such that we get it done in the 2 years that these poor projects demand.
Yeah.
Linda, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
The one piece I would add to what Linda was saying was that there are a number of projects that we receive special allocations of dollars, whether those be private dollars
Sure.
that we then match or other things. So just noticing on the current budgeted projects, there's a lot of things on there that aren't necessarily poor condition, but you know, Tom Jones, the individual, has donated over $1 million to that project, so that project's going to get done. But that's what I was just trying to match up was, Jim, what did you say we had in capital dollars?
Sorry, I was muted. The last report that I had with the detail, we had over $23.7 million sitting there, and of that 6 million, some had been spent.
And I guess the attachment E to the report, is that the 6 million that Jim's talking about?
I believe so. Yes, those are the dollars that are not associated with special projects. What you receive quarterly is all of those special projects broken out, which total that large sum of money. But attachment E does break down those infrastructure rehabilitation, of which you will see we have accounted for a plan to expend all of those dollars. And Commissioner Thomas, some of those, and Steve may be able to speak to how he made these determinations, but of resources that were available, some of those poor amenity improvements have been associated with those dollars now and are not reflected in the 22-23 budget because they were able to be accommodated through the. Steve, do you want to talk about what process you went through to determine those pours?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So those projects that weren't underway, under design, at bid, the dollars we need to hold for emergency, we were able to essentially take some projects from the poor column, and instead of putting it off into 22-23, we did exactly what I think, Linda, what you were suggesting, and we folded them into existing fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21 capital dollars, because some of those were not assigned. They were kind of generic as we needed it for structures or for utilities. So because we got the infrastructure report, we were able to pull some of those projects and move them into those dollars not yet spent. And a lot of these things are underway, or as I said, they may not yet be encumbered, but it may just be because they're at bid or going to bid.
But I'm still confused. The other 10 million that Jim's talking about are just not listed on this report. They're in process, but.
No, the additional of the 23 million, I think that Jim quoted, I believe that's everything. So that would include Tom Jones Commons, that would include Smale Riverfront Park and the River Edge dollars, that would include Lytle Park, that's over $2.5 million that we're still holding because of litigation. So a number of those dollars have not been spent, but are committed to specific purposes.
Okay.
Yeah,
but I guess that's one of the things that it would be nice to see, that here's how the whole 23 million is broken out. We're holding on to this 3 million because of Lytle Park litigation. We're holding on to this so that we know that we don't have other money sitting there waiting to be spent. But that raises some additional questions with the attachment E, because I think there were somewhere around $270,000 worth of line items in there that were associated either with Smale or with Washington Park, which all the revenues for those parks get diverted into a special fund. I'm not sure why, when we have accumulated poor conditions in parks that don't have funds, we would be diverting our rare capital dollars to those. I'm not saying that Smale doesn't need to be repaired. I think we need to be good stewards and keep it in repair, but we ought to be taking it out of a Smale related fund. Likewise with Washington Park. 3CDC is the one that said that they were going to take care of Washington Park. They were going to take all the revenues from it. They need to be taking care of the capital maintenance. So 21-212-000 has Washington Park general repairs and Smale Park general repairs. I know that those are probably placeholders, but 2020-00 has Smale ER miscellaneous steel repairs 22,000, Smale Cascades caulk and grout 100,000, Smale Anderson Pavilion water leak 50,000. So those are just the ones, and then there are some things that just say lighting and electric repairs. I don't know if those relate to all parks or
All parks.
It just seems, again, it's good that we're spending those capital dollars. From my perspective, it's bad that we're spending those capital dollars in parks that have identified revenue sources associated with them when We have other parks, and many of those parks are in historically Black neighborhoods that they're not getting the repairs done. So that would be my only challenge in this would be, we need to pull everything out that we can identify a separate revenue source for out of this capital, and put some of those, put your highest priority poor items in there, Steve. And again, I think, you know, when we see all of the poor items together, it does help to identify, because it's not necessarily just which is in absolutely the worst physical condition. There are other factors that need to go into deciding when something gets repaired.
Your point's well taken. And in the 22-23 budget, we did exactly that. We took out Crone, we took out Bettmann, wherever there was another funding source. And you're right, as I look at fiscal year 2021, if we're able to take some of those out of 329 or out of other sources or Washington Park, I defer to Craig. If we can afford to do that, we would do that.
Excuse me, in the E, attachment E, I don't understand it that the money's coming out of capital. To me, it's just saying what you're spending money on, not saying where it's coming from.
If you're talking,
Well,
I'm talking about attachment E.
attachment
look at it.
is just giving you detail in our capital budget every year. The city, this is the $2 million that the city's giving us on an annual basis. So when you see 22,000, what this schedule is trying to do is say of the $2 million that the city gave us, this is where we're planning on spending it. So these three in attachment E is just giving us some detail for how the capital money from the city's planned to be spent.
Well,
Yes.
so if that be the case, then Kevin's 100% correct. Why the devil are we taking money for SMAIL, spending money on SMAIL when there's a maintenance fund for SMAIL?
Well, I just have a question, a general question too. Are we moving on from the study report onto budget? Because I've got a host of questions related to attachment E, but I didn't know if we want to move from the study to the capital, or how you want to handle this.
I think we have almost, right? I think it's just one big pot of stew here that we're all consuming.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go
let me
ahead.
just ask a question because I'm not sure in which category it falls. The question that came up earlier about looking back at how much we've spent per year over the last several years, I think that is a very important one. And I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost. Because I think if we look at that number and we look at the number we're trying to spend going forward, what needs to change to have us be able to achieve that level of spending in the time frame we're talking about. So I just want to make sure we don't lose that, because that's a piece of data that will be very important for us as we are looking to make data-driven decisions now, which I think is great. My only other comment related to the past conversation is I want to echo what Commissioner Flynn mentioned. I had that in my notes to bring up and just hadn't gotten to it. The condition of parks overall. I think it's very important that we don't have disparities in terms of how our parks look depending on the location of the park. That we ought to have a consistent level of acceptable presentation for our parks regardless of where they are located. And I know that's not the case now, but I think that ought to be paramount in terms of how we go about managing our operations.
if I may, Commissioner Thomas, also, it seems like we are transitioning into the capital budget, and a part of that actually addresses that concern with the equity study. So we can touch on that in a few minutes, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
President Linder, I am ready to give that presentation if you'd like.
Okay. Is there any before we officially move on to the capital budget? Is there any other grist to chew over, on the infrastructure study?
Just one for me, if you would, Mr. President.
Okay, last one, Linda.
Yes, everyone seems to be the last one, but this was one I was just curious about. Last meeting, we had a discussion about a comfort station addition in Mount Airy. Right? Remember that one? I think it's $200,000 to.
That was around the bike park.
Yes.
Area
In
22.
this report, there's a comfort station in Mount Airy that's been offline for 30 years. And I was just wondering if those are the same.
Yes.
And yeah, okay, I won't go further than that because it just was a bit confusing to me. And questioning whether or not we're talking about an improvement to a piece of property that's been offline for 30 years, or whether we're just going to build a new one.
The idea was a renovation. That's what they're talking about, major restoration.
Okay. All right. I was just curious about that.
All right. Any other questions for Steve on the infrastructure study? All right. Well, let's move on to the capital budgets then. Go ahead, Kara.
Yes, thank you very much, commissioners. It is with great pride that I present this to you today, the recommendation for the fiscal year 22 and the fiscal year 23 budget. I would like to capture nearly everything that's in the board packet, mostly to give our wide audience an opportunity to hear some of the details that are included in your packet, but also to reiterate what I believe is incredibly important in this process. So if you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes. So as we have discussed, the park board was given a target by the budget office, and the city budget office target for us was approximately $2 million for fiscal year 22 and $2 million for fiscal year 23. These targets are in line with previous year appropriations and have consistently averaged $2 million. It has been common for parks to annually request additional exceptions surpassing that $2 million target, often by several million. These requests have always been included as the park board has identified infrastructure and project needs. However, they have rarely been added into our budget. This year, park submission for fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 22 and 23 has been prepared by data, supported by data collected through the infrastructure study conducted by Branstetter Carroll. The recommended budget has been prepared to request $4,563,500 for fiscal year 22, with exceptions in the amount of $261,000. And $4,775,500 for fiscal year 23, with exceptions in the amount of $530,000. As Mr. Schuckman referenced earlier, these costs were taken directly from the study. And since the study does recommend that both contingency and design and engineering costs are associated, we wanted to bring your attention again to that. And those are not included in your packet documents. But these additional costs include a 10% allocation for contingency costs and a 12% allocation for design and engineering costs, which would be applied only to the projects that are currently presented in the budget. So for fiscal year 22, this is an additional $785,510 for a total of $5,349,010. And the addition of $828,410 for a total of $5,603,910. Commissioner,
Sarah, can you repeat that? That's very confusing to me. Can you repeat what you just said?
so the budget that we presented to you is roughly 4.5 million for fiscal year 22 and 4.7 million for fiscal year 23. What was not included in your packet was additional costs associated that Commissioner Thomas referenced that would need to be added to that budget to allow for the contingency costs and the design and engineering costs.
So is it your plan to add it before it goes to the city?
Yes, yes.
Can you give me those two numbers again for?
Yes, I'll give you two sets of numbers. What the additional cost to the fiscal year 22 budget is $785,510. The total for the budget would be $5,349,010. Those same numbers for fiscal year 23 are an additional $828,410 for a total of $5,603,000. Sorry, I apologize. $5,603,910. Part of what I'm really excited about is that this capital budget was created with a lot of thought and a lot of thoughtfulness. And the recommended 22-23 budgets were constructed in consultation with the following documents. We did look at the recommendations in the infrastructure study, specifically those assets listed in poor and fair condition. We looked at the capital improvement priorities framework, which was originally reviewed by the board in 2019 to help identify the priorities in terms of need. We looked at the community budget requests, which were submitted to the city in their annual budget request process or project request process. We looked to the projects that were already currently budgeted to ensure that we didn't double up on any of those from the infrastructure study. We looked at a map of city parks and public green spaces within a 10-minute walk in the walk zones. This initial document is utilized as a starting point for the park equity study, which is only just now underway. Data points have yet to be fully determined, and how we will utilize those data points are yet to be fully determined. All going back to what you said, Commissioner Thomas, is to try and give us a framework to understand where the greatest needs lie. We also looked to the Division of Planning and Design staff structure, as well as the park master plan. We have already addressed staffing, and that this budget does presume that we would fully staff. This is a structure that you approved pre-COVID. So that this budget will just account for that full realization of that board or of that division. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I'm really pleased, and we have talked about this before, but when interacting with the facility study and the infrastructure study, it's not simply to just take that list of poor assets and start plugging it in. Staff have been very diligent and very thoughtful about evaluating each item, specifically to put it in a category of whether or not it's an asset that should be replaced. There are a lot of assets in our system that maybe no longer meet a current need of the community. An example of this, an asset, a large dollar asset that we identified for removal was the Owl's Nest Park bathhouse and shelter, which is currently in very poor structural condition and has not served an active function for the park in years. So it's taking the raw data, taking that information and putting it through a set of filters just to ensure that, we're not blindly just ticking things into boxes, but being very thoughtful about whether or not an asset should be repaired, replaced, or removed. As we've stated before, we have actively looked at other funds to fund both maintenance and repairs. So we've looked at those specific funds for Crone Conservatory upgrades, the Geyer Esplanade, Smale Riverfront Park, Bettmann Nature Center, a lot of things that have already been addressed here today, as well as the regular park furnishings such as picnic tables, benches, grills, trash receptacles, everything that came out of the capital budget before. We've been very diligent about that. And, all in all, this is where we've worked very hard to alleviate and free up capital dollars. I do want to highlight a couple of stories that I think that this budget tells, focuses that have priorities that have come into focus and really are supported in the biannual budget that we're presenting today. And these include, but are not limited to, accessibility efforts to eliminate barriers to access and enhancing access throughout the system. Playgrounds, identifying a fairly aggressive structure to replace at least 2 aging playgrounds within our system each year to enhance that accessibility, to enhance that play value. A focus at Mount Airy Forest with a large array of improvements, which helps align with the city's identification of their planning focuses for Mount Airy Forest at this time, including ADA improvements, putting together a plan for our beautiful but underutilized and underdeveloped arboretum, the beginner bike skills area, and parking availability for current amenities. Crone Conservatory, a focus on that for facility improvements, the roadways, including both repaving as well as critically looking at our roadway structures to determine if any surface area should be removed, put on a diet, what we call. The comfort stations, the utilities, and staffing, those are all things that we've discussed that have kind of, that's a story that has been developed through the creation of the capital budget. And the final thing I'd like to focus on is the future of the capital budget process. This is an idea that I've openly discussed with the commissioners in our conversations, but privately and publicly, to put a strategic process into place for engaging in the budget process, because there's not a single person on this phone call right now that is pleased that we're talking about this the first week of December and it's due the second or third week of December. So processes that we can put in place to employ for future cycles. The first feature is to best serve the needs and wants of the community is to initiate that community-driven capital project plan. President Linder, this actually goes to a comment that you had earlier, is how do we use all this information? I think it's really important to actively engage with the wants and needs of the community. They fluctuate. They often fluctuate even in between master planning cycles. So to be attentive to that. And at the end of that process, it just gives us a tool to weigh that against the other priorities. So I am enthusiastic about incorporating this process to equitably view different community-driven ideas. The second future will have a very proactive timeline for the development cycle, which will begin with the update for fiscal year 23 to allow for the timely and immersive involvement of the Board of Park Commissioners. Third is the development of that equity study and a determination how we want to engage with that. How do we identify from an equitability and sustainability focus or resilience focus, how do we identify what priorities should rise to different levels? For us, kind of as you've identified, Commissioner Thomas, we definitely want to be looking at areas that have been underserved and that deserve or need investment. And the last consideration is just kind of a future looking down the road needs would be to re-engage with the master plan for the department, as well as master plan for Crone Conservatory, which is certainly aging and in desperate need of repair. So there's some future visions. So following all of that, staff respectfully requests that the board review and discuss the recommended fiscal year 22 and 23 capital budgets. Just as a heads up to the commissioners, which we discussed at our last meeting, this deadline has been set by the budget office of December 11th. So just in awareness that if we bring this back on the 17th, we will submit it as soon as possible, but it will be beyond that deadline. There are many attachments included in this, but in conclusion, I just, again, wanted to say how proud I am of the staff's efforts to create a thoughtful and informed, equitable, progressive budget to meet the current needs of the parks. We have a long journey to repair and rehabilitate our parks, but we believe that this budget places great focus on parks which need the influx of revitalization, parks which have not been a focus in recent history, and parks which are long overdue and are falling short to meeting the needs of their community, ensuring that they feel welcome and that everybody feels like they belong in their neighborhood park. So I thank you. And obviously we have a full team here to engage with you and answer your questions and to ensure that we come up with a capital budget that satisfies your wishes for the future of the parks.
Thank you, Kara. Okay, open it up to questions for Kara and the experts.
I'm going to let Jim go first because I have a feeling he's got some of the same questions I have. So,
All right.
Just for clarity, Kara, then you're not going to submit this until we approve it on the 19th. That's correct, 17th, or whatever that is.
Oh, did I state the date wrong? Yes, that is what we agreed to at the last meeting, that we will not submit this until it is approved.
Okay. Well, so let's get into some of the nitty gritty.
Sure.
That's why we're all here. We love this, right? I guess the way that I would like to approach it for my questions is if we look at the attachment A, start at the very beginning, go a deer, start with A. A few questions on that. Sawyer Point, number one, why do we have $396,000 in here for Sawyer Point? And my concern is we know that we just spent over $750,000 on a fishing pier that needed repair. Now we've got $396,000 for a parking lot that needs to be repaired. And we've been withheld funds by the Board of Visitors unless we do the Gateway project that they would like to be done at over $1 million. So my question is twofold. Number one, it's a lot of money that we're spending out of our pocket that we should have had the funds along the way from the trusts, from the Bicentennial Trust that were not given to us. And number two, it's a lot of money being spent down there that I'm talking about priorities now. Why are we doing a Gateway statue repair when we know that you're putting in here now $400,000 of our money to be spent on the parking lot? So
Sure.
I'm questioning that.
Sure. I'll just say a little bit and then I'll send it over to Mr. Schuckman. These costs associated here are just associated with the general repair of the parking lot. They will not impact or are affected by any future renovations. But Steve, would you like to say it? Because I know this was addressed in the facility and infrastructure study. Would you like to address why you selected to place that in here?
Yeah, it's a big parking lot. It is a revenue generator. We know that there are future plans to make changes to the parking lot, to make it more green, to change the entrance. However, this was a more immediate need. I'm getting echo. This was a more immediate need identified in the infrastructure study to repave a major section of the parking lot, which is why it's in there.
So this has nothing to do with the redesign of that parking lot?
No, we would be able to do the repairs in such a way that, and we have to design it and figure it out. But this is to do the repairs that need to be done that wouldn't preclude future changes to the parking lot design.
Well, then the issue that I will come back to then is the one of equity, where we continue to spend more and more money on the riverfront. We're already being asked to spend over $1 million at the Gateway. We just spent $756,000 on the fishing pier. This is almost $400,000 additional that we're putting on the riverfront that I don't see as a priority based on other parks that are not getting capital, that haven't had capital for a long time. And Kara, I don't know how you want to do this, because I mean, there's a lot of line items here that I think are going to be questioned. So I guess we can do one of two things. We can give you all of our comments and ask for feedback from the rest of the board so that when you come back with a budget on the 17th, that we know what the issues are. It's sort of like the way City Council approaches it. You as the mayor has now presented to us as the council the proposed budget, and then if we're going to be giving you some alternatives, but I don't know that we have to decide every single one of these line items here, but I'd like to go through the rest of my concerns.
Commissioner Gatz, if I might address that, I do agree with that. Mr. Schuckman and I had spoken about what we thought would be the most productive use of our time, and that was exactly it. This item in particular is a good example of feedback that Mr. Schuckman and I would take to present another iteration of this for a second reading at the next meeting, and that's the exact kind of feedback that you want. You know, we have been very thoughtful, and obviously we could provide a rationale for everything that we chose to put in here. Subject to your prioritization and your comments, we would then take that and construct a final recommendation. So I would absolutely be in support of hearing from each of the commissioners, any concerns, questions, comments that you have. We will take that into, we will take that all back with us and modify the
Right.
budget.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate. I mean, this was on the study under the poor condition. So I appreciate that you are doing exactly what you said, which is what I think we ought to do. Now it's a matter of prioritizing those things, because there's poor things there are things from the other parks that were labeled poor. Let's talk about Mount Airy a little bit. Since Kevin let me go first, I'll talk about Mount Airy. I totally 100% agree, and we have talked about it with the doing the comfort center. This is what Linda was talking about too, that when we were talking about the Cora project, it's absolutely reasonable and I think justifiable that the park repair its facility there. So I fully agree with that. But then I look at in our capital budget, I have now seen for 2020 in our approved budget and capital that you've got $200,000 in there for bike trail parking facilities. So that's a $200,000. And then in the 2022, you've got for Mount Airy, Area 23, Beginner Bike Skills Area, $110,000. And that's the number that I heard in the presentation for the Cora Bike Skills Area. And Cora said that they anticipated raising the funds for that. So yeah. I'm wondering why we're putting in 110 of our money.
I don't believe that's the case, Jim, that the $110,000 is would be our contribution to create an accessible walkway. There's no paved walk to the comfort station or to the shelter. So my understanding is the Bike Skills Park would be all the bike components. We would be responsible for the walkway and for the comfort station.
Yeah. It is the same dollar amount. You're correct, Jim, but that is the distinction. The 2020 reference is the, I think it's parking for the bike trail itself. Right. And then the 110 is the ADA sidewalks and then the extra for the comfort station. I would like to point out, something that we built into the timeline for future budgets development. You know, the expense on the comfort station and the expense on the ADA trails for the bike system won't occur should we not proceed, you know, should something happen to the contribution with Cora. At that point, we would have those dollars roughly to the tune of $300,000 associated with that project. What we have built into the annual review process is all of those funds throughout the year, projects that came in under budget, projects that something happened and it was no longer a need, and the dollars associated would be a part of our discussion annually about how we would like to utilize those dollars. We would come to you with a recommendation, say there's $400,000 in the 22 budget that were not spent for reasons X, Y, and Z. Here are recommendations for how we think it would be spent. What do you think? And kind of go through this process again.
Okay, great.
If I could just add some color to that, because I'm familiar with both areas. So the parking is a completely separate area of the park. That is on the other side of West Fork Road, up Shepherd Creek. So that's part of the 4.5 miles or whatever that they already have of improved off-road bike trail. Deal Road is a spur that runs off. It's where the homeless shelter used to be years ago. It runs into the back edge of the park. It's actually, to get there, you have to go through Green Township, but it's in the park. So that's that parking area, because there really is no parking for that part of the course. There's very limited parking down at the very beginning of the course down on West Fork Road. This Mount Airy Forest Area 23 is back over on the other side of Shepherd Creek, kind of next to the back end of the park. And if you go there, all the parking is up at the roadway, but the comfort station and picnic area, enclosed picnic area, is probably 250 yards back at the edge of the ridge, at the edge of the hillside. So to get to that, to make it usable for someone, you know, you have to put in a walkway.
Super.
I'm not saying those should be priorities. I'm just trying to give color as to what those.
Well, and that's where I am fully supportive of the Cora program, and I love the Bike Skills Center. It sort of goes back to Brad's famous statement about a free pony, and that's where I think going forward we need to make sure that when we talk about these things that we have a full picture and not have these add-ons afterwards. But in this case, I would be supportive, knowing that that's not the 110 in the center itself. I understand that now. We've got another thing for Mount Airy with the playset for $125,000. We've got a lot in Mount Airy, and you made a comment about it's the city's focus, but I'm not sure what that means. But I would just want to bear in mind, you know, we've also got for Area 22, $72,000. And then we also have for Area 10 and 13, $20,000 back. So it's a lot of money that, again, I just want to make sure that, and I fully support the spending of the money in Mount Airy Forest. Let's make sure, though, that there's not another park that's getting zero that also has a poor play set, that they may consider getting it rather than Mount Airy.
If I may, Jim, we looked at that, and that is one of the older ones in Area 3 in Mount Airy. You'll see in 2023 budget, we are scheduling new playgrounds at Jackson Hill Park, in Mount Auburn, and McAvoy and College Hill.
Yep. Same way in playgrounds, we've got Hoffner Park in there for a playset replacement, just the same type of question. We just built for them last year the brand new AARP fitness center that's there. So they've gotten some love right now. I know the stairs are in under construction leading into Hoffner Park. So they're getting a lot of love. It's just a question, when I see the number of poor play sets in the multiple parks in the study, I just question, let's make sure that it's all going to the right, going to the right park for equity purposes. And then down in.
Jim, if you don't mind me interjecting there, because
Sure.
I also had a question on that, and it was related to Parker's Woods and Burnett Woods, the ADA path to the play set. I'm assuming that these play sets are ADA compliant, because it doesn't make much sense to build an ADA path to a non-ADA play set.
Correct. We have many play sets that are accessible, but they may be a few feet from a sidewalk, and we really need to create those spur walks to make them fully accessible. Agreed.
And then when in the enhancement area, two comments there about Burnett Woods. You know, I have to talk about Burnett Woods. Removal of cement around the bandstand. Nobody's talking about that. That's not an issue. I don't know why we're spending money removing cement around the bandstand. So that's one issue. Clearly by the lake in Brookline, we've been talking about that with the neighborhood about taking up the cement. So I'm fully supportive of that. I'm not sure what's the difference between an enhancement and being part of the budget that's up at top? Why is that one pulled down to the bottom?
What we've done is broken down both budgets into repair replacement versus new. So newer things like a master plan, doing new improvements, we are looking at, we've called enhancements. You'll see that in both the 22 and 23 budgets.
So the walkway that we were just talking about at Mount Airy for the ADA and the new sidewalk going back to the comfort station, that's not new?
It's a fair comment. It's a fair comment, Commissioner Getz.
Yeah.
Whatever logic we used to create this, we'll revisit, but that's definitely a fair comment.
Yep, okay, because I question why it should be down at the mercy of a line item veto, so to speak, at the bottom. And then just a general comment. What if it's $2 million instead of your $5.349 million? I'll just let that float out there. The big one in my mind, though, is also District 5. I noticed that you've already plugged into, I think that was on attachment E. For District 5, you've put somewhere you've got $268,000 plugged in for District 5. 2-point question here. Number one, has the city approved the sale to the CDC or the whatever it's NIOSH? Because then we would have the 1.7 and the 470,000. So I'm wondering why we're putting in our capital to spend $268,000 of our own money.
To answer your two questions, I know we have Christine on the call. I'm not sure. I personally do not have any input from the city on whether or not that the deal has gone through yet and what resources are available to us.
When we talked about this at the meeting where we approved it,
yep,
we thought that with the 1.7 and the 470, we would be covered. So it surprises me now that we want $268,000 out of our capital.
If I may, two things. One is that we would need to advance the design money. We don't know when the closing is going to happen. So we put in a placeholder. We think 268 won't cover the total design costs, but we put that in as a way to start the design process. We went through the process of doing an RFP. So there's an architect who we can bring on board that would get us at least to the point of having a basic design program and a budget to really know how much we need.
So are we going to get the 2.68 back then if we get the 1.7 and the $470,000?
I think I view it as all necessary. when I think about the dollars that we get for the sale, I guess in my mind, that sum total would be the dollars that we would utilize for the actual renovation and the move. I think if we eat into it by another 200 and some thousand, we would be at a severe detriment in our available resources to move
Well,
ourselves.
see, this is where I would like to have this type of discussion when we're talking about it. Back when we approved the sale, we said that the 1.7 and the 470 or 450,000 would cover what we needed. Now we're coming back and we've plugged it into capital that's already been granted. I would propose, rather than plugging it into capital that's already been proposed, put it as an exception. I mean, city council should help us with this move. It's our workspace. So rather than burying it in already approved capital, I would put it front and center to be approved by city council. If you're saying you need an additional 270,000, then put it in the budget. Don't bury it in what's already been approved that we did not talk about. Okay, we'll move on from there. And I would recommend, if we do that, pull the 268 out of buried capital and put it as an enhancement. And I would recommend putting the 260. The 260 we need for Brookline and Burnett Woods, let's put that in approved capital already. I don't know who made the decision to do the other way, but I would recommend putting it into approved capital.
Let me just mention, Jim, that there is a timing issue, and we don't know when the ordinance is going to be passed or when the property transfers. But obviously, the 2022 dollars won't be available until July 1st at the earliest. We may
Steve,
want to.
why would we commit money if we don't know it's going to go through? We're accepting here and burying in our approved capital from last year $270,000 for this move. And I don't know why we would be spending one penny of it yet until we know that it's going to be a done deal and that we know where the funds are going to come from. Because I don't think this commission approved spending $270,000 in consulting fees for this project.
Yeah, my point is just that if it goes through and if the transaction happens, at that point the clock starts ticking. We'd have to start design at some point.
Well, then come back
Maybe
to us
sooner
at
than
that.
later.
Come back to us.
We
at
could
that
do that.
point in time.
We could do that.
It just needs to be done rather than accepting and burying in prior year budgets. Bring it forward so we all have visibility, transparency, and agree to it. That's all I had on 2022. So I'll take a breather here if somebody else has anything on the 2022 proposed budget.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to highlight those things that come directly from the infrastructure study as poor, so that we can highlight that these are actually being taken care of, or these are being addressed as a part of this budget.
We can absolutely accomplish that for you, Commissioner Thomas, in the budget that we present next.
Great. And just a real simple question here. On the map that you showed earlier that talked about green spaces within a 10-minute walk, do you have those data by population? Like what percentage of our citizens are within a 10-minute walk of green space?
We do, and it's something close to 80%. Part of the equity study that we're doing is looking at not just where gaps are, we're looking at the comparison to the population by census tract and census block.
Yeah.
We're also looking at where there are either parks or recreation sites or school board green space. We're looking at what are the facilities in those spaces to see that they're equitable as well as their condition. we're also going to be looking at trying to collect health data and poverty data so that we can put it all together to really see where there are deficiencies.
Very good. Thank you.
Steve, on that, are you working with the Office of Data and Analytics on that? Because I know they've done a lot of.
I'll answer that. I'd like to answer that. The question is not quite yet. You know, we've presented this as an element that we are have at least kind of brushed all of our decisions to bring this recommendation forward through this lens, but it really is at the very beginning stages to be built as a tool for the future. Steve and I just had a conversation about working with OPDA. And really, this is a project that I'm most excited about, just interactions with our GIS analyst, Matt Devona, which you've met before. I'm really looking for his creativity and his ideas. Working with OPDA will help give some of those data points. And then Commissioner Thomas, once we have something built, then we get to start identifying how we want to engage with that to make decisions.
Not to give a campaign speech, but you know, the Office of Performance and Data Analytics was one of the things I really pushed for when I was on council. And since they are under the city manager's office, they oftentimes have a little more freedom with their budget than other departments do. And so to the extent that we can share data and or capture revenue from them to do what we're already doing, it might be helpful.
You know, it's not budget related, but since you brought up this whole study, I'm thinking today of priorities, and from a park board setting priorities for us. And I have to say that spending the time and energy of Steve Schuckman's time and yours, I mean, I fully agree in equitable distribution of green space. But my first reaction was, what are we talking about? We can't even maintain the existing parks that we have. And you're spending time and energy on where can we put new parks? And you've even put in the budget for 2022 or 2023, a potential $200,000 to be acquiring additional properties. I question the priorities and the focus of this department. That earlier today, we talked about not having the bandwidth to get done in a timely manner what we need to get done in our existing parks. Why we're spending time and energy looking at where we could put more parks seems a bit misplaced as a priority. And that's all I'll say about that.
To that, I'd like to respond to that. I think you make a valid point, Jim. The however for me is we need to know whether or not we move forward with acquisitions or anything like that is a separate question. Having the knowledge is important, because if we've got populations where you've got several options within a 10-minute walk versus other parts of the city where there's nothing, that's data we need to know. So I'm not saying we spend money on correcting that right now, but I think we need to know that.
That's a fair point. And I know I saw the same data the Trust for Public Lands already put out that same study where they showed for Cincinnati where the more than 10-minute walk is. That's already in the Trust for Public Land report. So I'm hoping that we take advantage of that data rather than recreating the wheel and spending our energy and our focus on recreating the data.
We're doing that, Jim. And Matt and I have created over the last 6 months a whole series of maps that take a deep dive into this, as Linda said, to collect the information. And even in the future, acquisition might instead be the development department owes us some money for land swaps, and it might not even be acquisition or easements or trades. It might simply be reinvestment in some areas that haven't been invested in. So that's just a placeholder.
Yeah. But we have contacted and we have the data from the Trust for Public Lands.
Oh, we've gone well beyond that. Yes.
Good, good. Well, I don't know if anybody's got, I was going to move to 2023 unless somebody's got more in 2022.
Before you do that, I'm just going to have to sign out right now. I've got about 4 minutes
Sorry.
until I have to go. So,
Sorry.
yes, I hate to miss this discussion.
Any last word for you?
Any last questions, Brad said?
Oh, no more last questions.
Sure, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For 2023, I just, again, it's focus and it's priorities. And to be listing on here, number one, the Bettmann Nature Center, again, that's one, and we've got $70,000 proposed for 2023. We've got a Bettmann fund. We've got money that, besides being in the existing account, we could claw back from what we sent back to them, 325,000 or 350,000, something like that. But this whole, at the bottom, these enhancements, spending $50,000 for Kennedy Heights master plan. I'm all into planning, but it's like, let's make sure we've got a plan in front of us for over $11 million in what we already know needs to be fixed. Spending more money and planning for master plans and talking about updating the 2007 plan. Again, focus. My focus would be why are we spending money with consultants when we know that we could be putting that 50,000 for the Kennedy Heights, Mount Airy Arboretum, I don't know, $70,000 for a plan. Seems like a lot of money, but and besides that, again, the $200,000 for green space acquisition and development, I think we're kidding ourselves to put that in there.
If I may, Jim, on Kennedy Heights, that was a community budget request, and it actually goes back to the 2007 master plan to expand Kennedy Park into the old Schroeder school site. That's something the community's brought forward, and they're actively engaged in getting an option on that land. And again, this would be an enhancement or an exception above and beyond if we even get it. But just to let you know that it has roots in our master plan. It's a current priority for the Kennedy Heights neighborhood.
Well, then back to Commissioner, President Brad Lindner's. So at what point does something that somebody, a community want, supersedes what we know from our master plan from Park Board standpoint of things that need to be done and repaired before they fall apart?
I'll make a comment here. This found its way onto, as Steve has said, this has been an identified location since 2007. We're obviously in 2020 and it hasn't occurred yet. As the planning department for the city actively engages with community plans, for 23, Kennedy Heights is slated, correct, Steve? That's what's slated for the planning department to take on?
Yes.
So that kind of then falls into the category of, sorry, there's sirens outside. Why we are, spending some time and resources on Mount Airy this year is, in tune with the city's master plan. I guess that's what I meant by the city's prioritizing Mount Airy. That's just their planning department's doing it. But this is dollars associated with, the city's going to oversee a comprehensive community plan. This was just an identification that it would be the appropriate time.
If this is at the direction of the city, why don't we put it as an enhancement then and let them approve the money for it?
Yeah,
It is.
No, it's below the line. Oh, that is going to be submitted to them, the 530?
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
But your other points on the other comments are well taken.
And I think, Jim, you may not have mentioned it, but Houck Gardens, isn't there a separate source for that as well?
City Acres, yeah. And I'm not sure what this expenditure is for. We just did that major expenditure for, I don't know what this is.
It's to create walkways, it's to create a gathering place. All the money that's been spent on Houck over the last year and a half is all landscape. There's really no pedestrian circulation system to speak of now.
So can we take it out of the City Acres endowment?
I understood that there wasn't sufficient money in the Houck fund to do that. Is Craig still on this call?
Yes, I need to look at the fund balance after the operations have completed the enhancement of the park to see if there's dollars available for that.
We'll conduct that assessment prior to the next meeting.
I do know we won't be able to use those dollars for the full 80,000, but a portion of it may be available to apply towards that.
Well, and if we sent dollars back from the City Acres thing when we were sending money back.
I don't think we did to that one, unfortunately. I've got that here, but too many pieces of paper. The only other thing that I had, and I'll start shutting up, is again, in the 2021, so in what's already approved budget, somehow you've slipped in there Burnett Woods concession building renovation for $63,000. And nobody's asking for that. And as you know, there will be a proposal in our December meeting about Burnett Woods. So this will not be necessary. So I don't know why it got plugged into approved capital.
It was identified in poor condition, so it came right out of the study for the roof and for the gutters.
Well, then part of our meeting proposal, because at our meeting in December, in a couple of weeks, when we're looking at Burnett Woods, I will be proposing that we spend a little money there to augment what Camping and Education Foundation is going to pay for us. So maybe that can be substituted there because we're not going to renovate that concession stand. And I thought that you guys said that was one of the things that you looked at for things that are poor condition, rather than rebuilding them or doing something. I'm surprised that got put into buried in approved capital.
Well, again, we didn't cover all the things that are in poor condition. We took a big chunk of them for the 22-23 budget. And as we said earlier, yes, where we could find money from existing budgets, some of those in the 2021 budget are right from the infrastructure study from the poor column. That's where they came
from. I thought there was going to be a discussion about what we need to rebuild versus not. And that was my point, that I don't think anybody wants to rebuild that concession stand.
Now
that's all the questions I had.
Yeah, Commissioner Getz, I guess the comment I'll make to that is that we hear you as a prioritization, and we'll as Mr. Schuckman said, why it was in there as an identification. I guess the comment about it won't be rebuilt. What we currently have at this moment is a historic structure that's starting to deteriorate a little bit. We have had some discussions internally about what the full expense needs to be on that and when. Perhaps tailoring it down to just some gutter work or something like that. But so that's where I'll just leave that comment, that we will take the comment into.
Just for full disclosure, like I said, when we're talking about the Burnett Woods master plan that we're presenting in a couple weeks, that will be part of the discussion. So just for full disclosure, just want to make sure that that's out there.
Mr. Chair?
Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, as I expected, Jim covered most of the things that I had questions about. The one thing is in fiscal year 23, under circulation, beyond the Bettmann Nature Center that Jim already talked about, I mean, there's one large line item, which is Clifton MLK resurfacing the road. I thought that we had an MOU with Department of Transportation and Engineering, and that was their
No.
that was their responsibility.
That it says MLK, but that's Lake Drive. Those are all our roads in Burnett Woods. We're certainly not going to start to repave Martin Luther King Drive. That's not ours.
You know, it says Clifton MLK.
I know.
But that, I mean, that is a significant, you know, that's between that and Brookline is $1.3 million.
Yeah.
You know, and to your point, Kevin, it's sort of off topic for this, but I think as we look at how are we going to fund our critical needs, I think one thing that I will propose in the future is that we do talk with the city. I mean, the city goes through on an annual basis and did bond issues and everything for the capital improvement fund, and we pave X number of miles of roads a year. And somehow I would like to be able to emphasize with the city council is that park roads are city roads too. And I would like to see if there is a way, because there's a big chunk of money in this study that goes to repaving, restructure, all that of streets. And I think we need to be more diligent in building a case for this shouldn't have to come out of the limited capital that we have for parks, but perhaps falls into the city's paving program that they already have.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think Steve already has spent a year beating his head against the Department of Transportation and Engineering's door. Because I know that there was one through street in Mount Airy, I think it's Blue Spruce, isn't it, Steve?
That's correct.
That we've decided to take on because Department of Transportation and Engineering said there was no way that they would take it because it's in so bad. It doesn't even come close to the standards of a city street.
And Kevin, doesn't City Council approve in the budget the DOTE? And I think I remember in those budgets on an annual basis, X number of miles of repaving of roads and all that.
Yeah, and they rarely, if ever, meet those goals. You know, they outsource all of that, Jim. It's all outsourced to 1 or 2 or 3 contractors. Generally, the bids come back higher than what we had budgeted for them. And even when Harry Black had the capital acceleration program going at full tilt, we were still barely doing I think it's 110 miles of road resurfacing. We were trying to get ahead of it so that we were actually spending money on some of the roads that weren't falling apart to keep them from falling apart, because it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than it is to have to rebuild the entire road. As with some of these, I think that's what we're talking about, Steve. Is that correct? That's why they're so expensive?
Yeah, some are full depth repairs. And the other issue is a legal one, that no park roads, except the ones under the MOU, are right of way. So council could not spend those dollars on those roads without some other legal action.
Well, I think this falls in with the whole conversation about now that we've got third-party data that supports our needs, that whatever bucket it comes out of, it's a legitimate, real expense for maintaining our parks. So
I would agree that that's a good rationale for an exception. There would be park roadways, because because that's not that's not normally what you think of when you think of park improvements or park capital dollars is roadways. I mean, 80% of the people driving on Blue Spruce Drive are not using the park. They're driving as a pass through to avoid Coleraine Avenue for part of it. And I would venture to say that, you know, some of those roads in Burnett Woods, in addition to providing parking for UC students, are also pass-throughs to Jefferson and.
Not anymore,
At least they
actually.
used to be.
Yeah, not anymore.
Right.
Commissioner Flynn, I think it's a really good point that these roadways could be effective as an exception. They're not, this level of repair is not going to come up very often. You know, Steve, did you say it's been like 30 years since this road has last been repaved to this level?
Oh, probably at least that. You know, we're doing well if we could patch the potholes. But we do not plan to repave streets that we're hoping to remove.
And I recall another councilman, I believe Councilman Seelbach, that brought up in Mount Adams in the park up there, back when I was on council, there were guardrails that were coming down or were in bad shape, and so there was an exception approved for that, even though it was within the park, within Eden Park. The city said, yeah, this is dangerous, we better approve this money. So I think there's a good argument to be made, and as someone who hopes to be one voting on that, I will just tell you that.
Any other questions for Kara? Well, you guys have done a good job on your homework and questioning. I appreciate that.
President
I guess
Linder, I'd
Yeah,
like
go
to
ahead.
say thank you to the commissioners for taking the time to review the details of it and for giving us that feedback. As we stated earlier, we will take that feedback and repackage it, you know, for a second reading at the December meeting.
I, for one, really appreciate all the work that went into this. It was very clearly done. It was very clearly intentionally done. It wasn't just thrown together. And while it may never have been just thrown together, it always felt like that in the past, that we were just given a big chunk and said, here, vote on this capital budget. You can tell that, you know, every I has been dotted, every T has been crossed, every plus sign has been put in there. That Steve, kudos to you and your team for doing this, along with Craig and along with Director Kish. You did a really good job on this. As much as we beat you up on it, I think you did a really good job on it.
I
Well,
agree. Excuse me, I agree, but I'm kind of curious as to why we're waiting another whole year to tear down the building at Owl's Nest. Why are we waiting till 2023? Why isn't that in why what 2022?
Well, let me say that as we look at the budget and incorporate the comments we've just heard, I suspect we'll be able to accommodate that, possibly even in existing dollars, and not have to wait.
Okay, well, I only
Okay.
hope so, because having been there numerous times, I mean, it's really a building that not good things happen at.
It's a safety issue, and it's kind of scary looking. And I
Yeah.
just want to say, from staff's point of view, we really appreciate the comments. This meeting was exactly what we were looking for, and not doing what we've done in the past is present you the budget at a single meeting and have to make all those decisions at that meeting. So thank you.
Okay, process improvement. I love it. It's great. And Steve, you know, hopefully you haven't been beaten up too hard today, but you know, we
Nah.
all absolutely appreciate the work and the knowledge that you bring and the experience. And you've got a great staff. We just hope to see it get a little bit bigger, you know, to give you guys more capacity to digest more projects going forward. So,
And I appreciate the board finding other sources of funding that we may have overlooked. So that's great.
all right. If there's nothing else, I guess we will see each other, well, potentially in person or maybe not. I can't remember how long we have to, the lockdown is, but whether it's virtual, whether it's live, or a combination thereof. Next meeting is December 17th. So look forward to approving this and whatever else we have to do then.
Brad, I do have a cardboard stand-up. If we can't get together in person, maybe I'll drop that off for you.
If you would all get me something, I can put it in here, you know, so we can have a pretend real live meeting virtually. So if not that, I'll repopulate it with the rest of the Reds cutouts. I figured I would spare you guys one more meeting of my cousins and nieces and everybody else. But if we're doing this again, please send me any cutouts or whatever you have, and I'll populate the room. It's getting a little lonely in here. All right. Well, with that, we will see you guys one way or the other in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very
Meeting
much.
adjourned.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.